Hi there, I'm Srishti, and in this video, I will be listing out 10 worst ways to start a novel so that you can avoid these pitfalls in your own writing. Last month, I created a similar video talking all about first chapter mistakes that new writers end up making. Watch that video here because I won't be repeating any of those tips in this video. Let's get started. 1. Starting with too many characters. On this channel, I've talked about how and why characters are the most important aspect of any story. Because characters are the vehicles inside of which your reader is going to sit down and experience the journey of the story. And in that video last month, we talked about choosing the right character to open your novel. Be it the protagonist or a side character, you need to pick the one person, the one character who is best suited to bring your reader into this story. And even though many new writers do choose a right character, they end up introducing 20 new characters in the big 20 first pages of the book itself because you think that all of these 20 characters are important. Maybe they are important because maybe you're writing Cinderella and the 20 Dwarfs. Even in that case, I feel that introducing a lot of characters in the beginning of a novel is only going to overwhelm your reader and sometimes even make them feel frustrated because they can't really remember all the names and all the descriptions. They don't know who is who. That's why even if you have 20 characters who are important for your story, I highly recommend asking yourself, can I explore each of these characters in the later stages of the book? Usually, my thumb rule is to not introduce more than 3 characters in the first chapter because that way I can ease the reader into my story and then later on they can be prepared to know other characters as they become relevant to the story. Second worst way to start your novel is starting with a mysterious voice. Many times writers are desperately looking to hook the readers on their first page itself, and that's why they end up using this mysterious, intriguing voice which has that effect of hooking anyone who's reading into the story. But what ends up happening is a lot of times once the protagonist and the characters and everyone, the actual story is introduced to the readers, the voice somehow fades away because the writer forgets about this voice. Personally, I don't like this method because it feels like clickbaiting your readers, especially when that voice is never going to come back into the narration of your story. Now, of course, there are books which have done this beautifully in the past, example Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, but there are many more books that have messed this up. For example, I was recently reading Stephen King's novel A Fairy Tale, which begins with a mysterious voice and you really want that voice to stay with you. But as the story progresses, I realized that this voice is not coming back and I felt that kind of disappointment. Now, I'm nobody to judge Stephen King. He's an amazing writer and maybe that book was just not for me, but I'm just using that as an example to tell you how mysterious voices can sometimes act like clickbaiting and can lead to disappointment in your reader's mind. At this point of the video, if you are getting any value out of it, please like the video and consider subscribing because here I talk all about writing compelling novels and creating rich, vivid experiences for your readers. Moving on, the third worst way to start your novel is starting with a lot of description. Description is such a tricky thing because although it feels simple, I have a love-hate relationship with it. Sometimes I just love description in certain places, but other times, most times actually, not so much. In my opinion, when you are describing something in your story, then that thing needs to be worthy of being described in that moment. Let me explain. Long paragraphs of description usually bogs the reader down and makes them feel as though the story is not moving forward. Now, as a reader, while reading a book, if you have ever skimmed through the paragraphs to look for the place where the dialogue begins, you know exactly what I mean. So here's my thumb rule for description. You must only describe those things that need to be described in that specific moment as they become relevant to the story. I know this is controversial advice because maybe you're one of those readers who love that immersive description. Maybe you love having each and every detail on the page, and in that case, let me know in the comments because I want to know how many readers really like that. Moving on, the fourth worst way to start your novel is starting with the wrong perspective. Choosing a perspective is one of the first choices a writer has to make when they begin writing a new story. And I strongly believe that this is one of the most crucial choices a writer will ever make for their story. Because everything that the reader sees, feels, believes is going to be dictated and heavily influenced by the type of perspective you choose to tell the story in. I understand how confusing it can be to choose the right perspective for your story, considering how many options you have. First person, second person, third person, close third person, omniscient, and blah 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 blah, because new and new types of perspective keep arising each and every day. There are new things that writers are experimenting with in the present times, and I understand how confusing it can be for you to decide. And also the hit and trial method is also not very reliable. I can't really ask you to keep throwing balls at the wall and just hope and pray that something would work. Therefore, if you want me to create a dedicated video on perspectives, teaching you how to choose, or at least how I choose the perspective for my stories, then comment the phrase, "I want that perspective video." The next worst way to start your novel is starting with character thoughts. Before you misunderstand me, let me clarify that when I say character thoughts, I don't mean character interiority related to what's happening in the story at that given time. I'm actually referring to all the opinions and beliefs of your protagonist that you think your reader needs to know right away. As a professional editor, I have seen so many writers send me their manuscripts which open with an essay in which their protagonist is explaining their opinions on the world and sharing their life philosophy. Trust me, it's one of the worst openings you can have for your novel because it's not just boring, it's also frustrating for the reader because they came here for the story that you promised to them on the blurb, on the back of the book. You promised a story and they came here for the story. They don't care about your protagonist's belief on world politics or I don't know, capitalism or something. Next worst way to start your story is starting with world building. This is similar to description but very specific to setting and location. As a writer, I understand that you want your reader to be completely grounded inside this fictional world that you are building for your readers. Mostly I get this question from fantasy writers because they have built something outside of ordinary. But trust me, even if you have an exciting new planet, if you start your story explaining this exciting new planet, this other world that you've built, I don't think that's going to increase any excitement in your readers. Because remember, the story is about who it happens to and how it changes them. So it's all about the characters first, and world building comes much later. Whenever we think of a story, it's always who it's happening to, what happened to them, and then where it happened comes much later in the story. Therefore, I highly recommend not starting with world building and then let your readers explore this new world that you've built through the characters. Remember what I said, the characters are the vehicles inside of which your readers are going to sit and experience this journey. So let them experience the world through the characters and don't try to explain it. Seventh worst way to start your story is starting with too much suspense. A common misconception writers have is this: a lot of mystery is going to evoke a lot of suspense. This, although sounds realistic, but is actually not true. Okay, imagine this situation that I'm telling you a story, okay? And then imagine two situations. In one situation, I'm going to reveal 2 facts and then I'm going to keep 8 secrets from you, okay? So that's one way of starting a story. And in the second situation, what I do is I reveal 9 things, or maybe I reveal 8 things, 8 facts about a story, and I keep that one detail or those 1 or 2 details which can change everything about the story. In which case do you think you will be more curious? Most likely it would be the second case, because you will be focusing on what's that specific mystery. So when you narrow down on 1 or 2 specific mysteries, that's when you can evoke more suspense in your reader's mind. Whereas if you try to only reveal 2 things and there are like 8 things, 8 mysterious things, then in that case the reader may feel more confused about those 8 things and they wouldn't know which of those things they should really care about. I don't know if I was able to make my point clear or not. I really tried hard, but the bottom line, quite simplified, is this. Don't worry about revealing too much in the opening chapters of your novel, because real suspense is not about what happened. It's about how what happened changed and impacted everything else. Number 8, starting with a long summary. In all kinds of fiction, you can either write a summary of events or a detailed scene. A balanced combination of a summary and scene will lead to a solid narration. However, it's my personal observation that whenever a book begins with long paragraphs of summary, even if it's a lot of telling, a lot of backstory, or things that you need to reveal to the reader, even if it's all of that, even then, sometimes long summaries can just not be the right hook to grab your reader's attention. That's why I suggest having a shorter summary in your narration and then quickly launching into a scene to make your reader feel immersed in the story. 9th worst way of starting your novel is starting with a prologue that's not a prologue. If you Google the word prologue, you will come up with a lot of definitions, and of course many writers choose to believe many different versions. But here is my favorite version that I'm going to share and believe for the sake of this video. A prologue is a section in a novel that comes before the first chapter and provides context about the story which cannot be weaved into the book naturally. Also, if you remove a prologue, the essence of the main story should not reduce in any sense, but the existence of the prologue should elevate the understanding of your story for your readers. Now, I know that if I start explaining that definition to you and start talking about prologues, that would become a new video entirely, so I'm gonna save that for a separate video. But what I really want to tell you that many writers tend to have a prologue just for the sake of having a prologue, because they believe that if you have a prologue, you'll have a strong hook. That's why they end up adding prologues to stories that don't really need a prologue. And the reason why I think this is a bad way of starting a novel is because a prologue is going to make your reader pause and think why this specific section is separate from the rest of the story, from the main story. So if you want to have a prologue, I'm not discouraging you from having a prologue. By all means, have a prologue if you think your story needs one, but don't have a prologue just because you want to have a hook to clickbait your readers. That's something that I would not recommend. It would not work in the long term and would lead to reader dissatisfaction. You don't want that. The next bad way to start your novel is starting with the wrong pattern. This tip is not specific to the first chapter, but is specific to the first 25% of your entire book. As a creative writing graduate, I have read across many genres and many variations of writing, and what I've learned from that is, as a writer, you're not just building a story, you're also building a pattern, you're also building a set of rules for yourself that you are restricting your writing under. You're actually teaching the reader what is allowed and what is not allowed inside your writing techniques. Most times it's just simple stuff. Maybe you're just alternating between POVs. Maybe each of your chapters have a specific rhythm to it. Even in my debut novel, what I did is I was alternating between 2 perspectives, and I made it clear to the reader that the whole story is going to be under these 2 perspectives. And then there was a point where I changed perspective to a 3rd character, where I made an exception and which would have been a surprise point for the reader. So I actually built a pattern and then I broke the pattern. That I think I'm gonna save for another video how I did that, but what I'm trying to explain to you is that while you're writing the first 25% of your book, you're also teaching your readers what craft techniques you have allowed yourself to use in this specific novel. Now, maybe you're writing a linear book. When I say a linear book, I mean something that does not need to have a pattern, and if it's a straightforward story, you meet a character and they have like a maybe, you know, a third person or a first person, and it stays constant, it remains like that throughout the story, then you don't need to worry about it. This tip, I agree, is slightly advanced, slightly for those people who are writing novels with certain patterns. Like maybe you have one present storyline going on, but there are some flashbacks that come in between. Or, you know, maybe you have alternating POVs, maybe you have more than one person telling the story. Maybe your story takes a shift from one setting to another setting. So those kind of things I'm talking about, those things, those are patterns. And you need to make your reader aware of those patterns in the first 25% of your book, because that's how your reader is going to expect from the rest of the novel. There are ways to break this rule too, but I'm gonna teach that in a separate video. For now, the reason I'm emphasizing on this specific point that you need to explain your pattern is because if you do have a pattern and if you do not convey it to the reader, they may feel that you're going off on some random tangent in the middle of the book, which will be sort of defying the expectations that you set up for them in the beginning of the novel. That's it. I hope you found this video helpful, and if you did, let me know in the comments, and also I hope you have subscribed, because why not? I'm awesome. This is me, Srishti Rathour, signing off for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and if you loved this video, I'm sure you will really enjoy this video next. So please watch it, and I'll see you next in this one. Until then, bye bye.